Good evening, treats, and welcome back to another Tales of the Hunger Games After 100 story. This is the 104th games, and as usual, I'd like to thank Christian Blanco for creating the series, and Andrew Maclaine for also creating the wonderful art used in this video. Furthermore, some of you were asking about what year it was in this series. This year, if you look back at the 101st games, it says that this is 2 years after the 100th games. So, well, not 2 years after the 100th games, but it's basically 14 years above the game's number. So in this case, it would be the 118th year after the 0th Hunger Games or whatnot. Anyways, so basically the 101st games took place 2 years after the 100th games. FYI. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump straight into today's video. And I'm sorry if this is a little short, because I was working on the quell, but I promise you'll love the quell. Alright, okay. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the video. And I'd also like to thank Ken and Red Dragon. Yeah, Twitter in the description. Okay, that was enough talking. Into the video. Andrew Maclaine, victor of the 103rd Hunger Games, arrived in District 12 to conduct his first reaping of the year. An uneasy tension had formed in the reaping square, as Mayor Scene gave his speech. Once the speech was over, Wither walked over to the female reaping bowl, where he drew a name from its depths. Wither announced this to be 16-year-old Suzanne Collins. A murmur rippled through the female reaping enclosures as cameras panned on a skinny, gaunt girl with long blonde hair. Rosalind smiled nervously before walking to the stage quickly. Once on the stage, Rosalind shook Wither's hand before standing behind him quietly as he drew a name from the male reaping bowl. Once Wither had unfolded the piece of paper, he announced this to be 17-year-old Solomon Grew. Another murmur flowed through the crowd as cameras focused on a tall boy with short brown hair. Solomon sighed before walking to the stage amidst stares from his peers. Lauren commented that she did not like the way Solomon dressed, while Ken stated that he thought Solomon looked like a slow runner. The reaping was then called to a close, before Wither, Rosalind, and Solomon walked into the town hall. Once the tributes were in the town hall, there was alleged to be rioting outside. However, this was never confirmed, and was also quickly suppressed by the peacekeepers present. Inside the town hall, Solomon and Rosalind were both visited by their parents, who wished them luck in the games, but did not have much else to say. Rosalind allegedly cried, while Solomon was known to have sighed many times. Once the meeting time was up, the tributes were taken to the train station, where they sat on the train and anxiously awaited their mentor. After President Cardew was elected, he had signed a deal with Rue Mellerk, victor of the 90th Hunger Games, which stated that she was allowed to be in the capital, but only for mentoring tributes. He also made it clear that Rue was only allowed to be in certain buildings, and was thus still not free to roam the capital. Once Solomon and Rosalind were on the train, Rue entered the carriage and greeted them. Both Solomon and Rosalind were clearly surprised. However, Rue quickly stated that she was their mentor. Rosalind proceeded to ask where Gail Hawthorne was. However, Rue stated that Gail was somewhere in Europe, and was therefore unable to mentor the tributes. Solomon and Rosalind seemed to understand, and therefore listened as Rue spoke about the upcoming week and what to do during training. Rue then allowed her tributes to eat anything they wished from the buffet, before turning on the TV and watching the second season of Kid Game. As night fell, Rue, Solomon, and Rosalind binge-watched all episodes of Kid Game, while eating dinner and occasionally chatting. The next morning, the train arrived at Snow Station, where the tributes were greeted by a few fans. Because District 12 was not a very strong district, there were not many capital citizens awaiting its tributes. Instead, The citizens present were mostly capital dentists and doctors, who were curious about learning more from the tributes. When Solomon descended from the train, he was called over by a few men. The men asked Solomon about his life in District 12, before requesting that they take a few photos together. Solomon agreed, and soon he was chatting merrily with the men. Meanwhile, Rosalind had descended from the train, and had followed Rue directly to the limousine. Once in the limousine, Rue spoke with Rosalind about the capital, and when Solomon had joined them, they drove to the accommodation center. At the accommodation center, their stylists, Forte Windswick and Beatrice Friend, met them. Despite this, peacekeepers present noted that both stylists seemed unhappy at mentoring this district. After a while of discussion, Solomon stated that he liked the surgeon outfits, which Rue seemed fine with. Forte and Beatrice then began to take the tribute's measurements, while the tributes watched more episodes of Kid Game with Rue. Throughout the day, the tribute spent some time hanging out with Rue while enjoying the delicacies of the capital. The next night, the tribute parade was held. At the front, Camillus and Jemmy, both of 1, were staring enviously at outfits of Jelon and Olympia, both of 2. Jelon and Olympia were proudly bragging about their outfits, which had been designed by Bravo Malayev and Aroma Paddock. During this time, Jelon and Olympia proudly flexed their golden armor, which caused the other tributes to stare at them. The last carriage in the line belonged to the tributes from 12. There, Rue was speaking to Rosalind, while Solomon played with his mask. Forte was also there, and after Rue was done talking, he instructed the tributes to take off their masks at the same time midway through the parade. The chariot call then sounded, which caused the tributes to board their carriages. Leading off the parade, Camillus and Jemmy, both of 1, led, in white outfits adorned with diamonds. However, their popularity was quickly overturned by Jelon and Olympia, both of 2, who were dressed in stunning golden armor, along with a few bright white gems on their armor. As their chariot turned the corner, Jelon and Olympia drew swords from the sheaths at their sides, which saw much cheering as Jelon and Olympia raised their swords. Further down the parade, Charge and Loader, both of 5, were dressed in outfits that resembled the sun and moon, which was also well received by the capital. Wolf Anderson and Andrew Maclaine joined Lauren and Ken in the commentators box, where they chatted about the outfits, but eventually seemed to agree that District 2's outfits were superior to District 5. At the end of the chariots, Solomon and Rosalind stood nervously while holding hands. Midway through the parade, Solomon shouted at Rosalind to take off their masks. However, Rosalind seemed too nervous, which saw Solomon take off his mask and smile nervously, while Rosalind was still frozen with shock. Eventually, Solomon sighed before reaching over and ripping the mask off Rosalind's face and tossing it into the crowd. After the parade, it was announced that District 2 had won the title of Best Dressed with a final score of 53% to 45% against District 5. The remaining 2% was given to various other districts, but it was clear that District 2 and 5 had produced the best outfits this year. In the apartment for District 12, Forte and Beatrice asked Rue why she wasn't in the District 2 apartment, asking Bravo and Aroma to be stylists for next year. Rue replied that she had heard from the other mentors that the 2s were being grouchy and were not allowing many mentors in. The next morning, Rue woke her tributes and gave them some breakfast, before taking them down to the training center, where they were the first ones there. After chatting with Ken for a bit, Rue headed up to the mentoring galley, where she watched as Ken introduced himself, and once the other tributes had arrived, he explained the rules of training, before leaving the tributes to their own devices. Solomon and Rosalind immediately walked over to the medical station, where Solomon grabbed 2 dummies and laid them down on the operating table. He then grabbed some supplies, along with 2 pairs of gloves. Together, Solomon and Rosalind spent their time performing various procedures on the dummy, while chatting with each other. Midway through the morning training, Solomon and Rosalind watched as Alfonso of 10 was challenged to a sword fight by Jemmy of 1. Surprisingly, Alfonso accepted the challenge, and to the surprise of almost everyone in the training center, Alfonso managed to beat Jemmy with a score of 11-7. Jemmy swore as she got up from the station and angrily tore down her pads, before walking to the other careers. She then cussed at Alfonso multiple times before heading over to the speed station, where she practiced with the other careers. During lunchtime, Rosalind spoke with Rue about where to practice afterwards. However, Rue replied that she should work on forming a bond with Solomon. After lunch, Rosalind walked over to the survival station, where she quizzed Solomon about various survival techniques. However, Solomon seemed uninterested and bored during his answers. After a while, Jalan of 2 came over and challenged Solomon to a sword fight. Solomon laughed at this challenge, before asking Jalan why he was challenging him, and not someone stronger. Solomon gestured toward Timber of 7, working in the Axes station, and proceeded to ask Jalan if he was scared of getting beaten by someone strong. As Solomon looked towards Jalan, the latter slapped the former in the face, which caused a fight to ensue. However, the training staff quickly took both to the sword station. Once both were dressed properly, the fight began, with both tributes clearly taking on the other in anger. However, eventually, Jalan got the upper hand and stabbed Solomon's chest pad multiple times, before asking who the coward was now. Rosalind had watched this fight. However, as this was quietly going on, she walked over to the stealth station, where she hid herself within some sand and tried to stay still while a holographic tribute walked by. As training was about to end, Khen called everyone in and led the tributes to the racetrack. Once at the racetrack, Khen explained that they were going to play a game called Red Light, Green Light. Khen then walked to the finish line of the racetrack, where he turned around and called out Green Light. Immediately, most tributes ran forwards. However, when Khen suddenly turned around and shouted Red Light, Bun of 9 lost his footing and fell. Khen immediately laughed and told Bun to stand on the side. Khen then turned around and shouted Green Light again. A second time Khen shouted out Red Light, Solomon had stopped running just in time. However, unfortunately for Rosalind, she couldn't stop herself and almost tripped. Khen laughed again, before waiting for Rosalind and Linda, of 7, who had also lost balance. The two then walked to the side to accompany Bun, while watching the game anxiously. Eventually, Olympia of 2 was the first to reach the finish line, with Camelius of 1 and Bilia of 10 in tow. Once all tributes were either past the finish line or standing to the side, Khen congratulated the winners before telling the losers to run a lap around the racetrack. The winners were then dismissed, while the losers ran their lap. The next day, all tributes were taken to the training center, where their training scores were assessed. The careers all scored highly, with Jalan and Olympia scoring 10s, while Camelius and Jemmy scored 9s and 8s respectively. The other scores were mediocre, with Alfonso of 10 scoring the highest of all non-careers, with a score of 8. When Solomon's assessment came, he allegedly showed a display of strength. However, no more details were leaked, which caused many rumors to fly around the capital after he scored a 6. Rosalind, on the other hand, seemed nervous as she was the last tribute. Rosalind was known to have not used any weapons, but to have allegedly done something unique. No details were ever revealed, but a few drunk game makers later said a few things about berry juice and canvas. Rosalind scored a 5, which was not very high, but kept her from meeting the bottom of the pack. App of 3 and Quill of 8 both scored 3s, which saw them earn the lowest scores this year. That night, Rue spent a lot of time briefing Rosalind on how to act during the interviews. while Solomon relaxed in bed while drinking tea and watching TV. Rosalind chatted for a long time with Rue. However, as night fell, Rue stood up and led Rosalind to the balcony, where they talked about their lives in District 12 while marveling at the capital skyline. Rue then told Rosalind to go to the bed, which she proceeded to do. The next evening, the tributes were held in the newly renovated Dalton Studios, which were meant to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Aeneas Dalton's victory. When Lauren took to the stage, the audience, which was mostly dressed in black and white, stood still in a moment of silence to honor Aeneas. Lauren then began the interviews. Jemmy of One was the first to be interviewed. On the stage, Jemmy spoke with Lauren about her accomplishments in District 1's training academies. However, the highlight of her interview was when Lauren asked what she thought about the Tributes from 2's chariot parade outfits. A tense moment of silence followed, and after Jemmy thought for a bit, she replied that looking good wouldn't stop death, which caused laughter from the audience. The remainder of the careers' interviews passed like expected. Gillon proudly stated during his interview that he was a Dalton, while making it clear that he planned to win in order to celebrate his great-uncle's 30th victory anniversary. The other interviews passed by uneventfully, with Regina of 6 joking with Lauren for a long time and Alfonso talking about his high training score. After a long procession of some boring interviews, Rosalind's interview took place. Rosalind spoke about her life in District 12, which clearly bored viewers. However, more citizens seemed to pay attention when she gave some hygiene tips, which seemed to slightly interest Lauren. Once Rosalind had left the stage, Solomon walked forwards and shook Lauren's hand. Solomon spoke politely during his interview and answered Lauren's questions. However, towards the end of his interview, he had nothing much to say. After Solomon was the interview of head game maker Blanco, who not only told Capital citizens that he had worked hard to design this year's arena, but had also planned some events where citizens in Snow Square could take place. This saw much excitement ripple through the capital, as tickets for viewing in Snow Square sold out the same day. The next morning, the tributes were woken early and taken to the holding rooms under the arena, where they were dressed in a jacket, shirt, and pants. Rue visited Rosalind and told her to grab water and to find high ground. Rue then wished Rosalind luck, and watched anxiously as the latter entered her tube. Forte was unhappy at first to be visiting Solomon. However, once he was promised a VIP viewing seat in Snow Square, he happily agreed to visit Solomon. In the holding room, Forte told Solomon to grab water, food, and to find a vantage point, where he could see other tributes approaching. He then wished Solomon luck, and hummed merrily as Solomon entered his tube. As the podiums rose into the arena, most tributes shuddered at the relatively cool climate. The arena was roughly 4 square kilometers, and resembled the design of an abandoned amusement park. The cornucopia lay in the center of the park. Further away from the cornucopia, there lay many dismantled buildings and rides, most of which were still stable enough to hold a human. Towards the north of the cornucopia, a large pool lay, which contained many water-related rides and former attractions. The western area of the arena featured massive roller coasters, which had multiple broken rails, but also provided interesting hiding spots. Further east, a small nature park, along with other rides, could be found. These rides were not as big as the roller coasters. However, they were certainly of large size. Due south of the cornucopia, a large carnival tent was erected. However, the entrance to the tent was locked and guarded by a force field, which discouraged tributes from entering. In the cornucopia, bows and arrows, throwing knives, swords, and spears were scattered around the mouth. Further away from the mouth, there was some food and drink. Khen immediately commented that this year a lot of tributes would be able to obtain supplies because of the way it was scattered. As the countdown began, Solomon of 12 looked intently towards the nearby sandwich and a bottle of water, whilst ignoring Jelon of 2, who was grinning towards him from his left. Meanwhile, Rosalind was placed on a podium between Linda of 7 and Swimma of 4. As the countdown began, Rosalind looked towards the outer rides. However, she quickly turned around and focused her attention on the supplies instead. The gong then rang out, which saw all tributes running inwards. Solomon had immediately ran towards the sandwich. However, he screamed upon seeing Jelon tackling the boy from 4 to the ground. Solomon proceeded to snatch out the water bottle and run towards the water park. Meanwhile, Rosalind had run forwards and grabbed a bottle of water. She then seemed to contemplate grabbing a knife. Rosalind ran inwards. However, when she saw the girl from 3 getting stabbed in the neck by Olympia, she breathed out in disgust and ran towards a sandwich instead. Unfortunately for Rosalind, the boy from 6 had also reached the sandwich, but Rosalind punched him hard in the face, before grabbing the sandwich and running back towards the cornucopia. At the cornucopia, Rosalind grabbed a knife while Camillus was busy stabbing the girl from 9 in the heart. Rosalind then ran away towards the roller coasters, while dodging the body from the boy from 8, who had just been shot in the head with an arrow by Jemmy. Rosalind proceeded to run towards the roller coasters, where she found an area to hide. As Solomon traveled up a staircase, which led to a tall water slide, he heard 5 cannons boom out in the distance. Solomon sighed before walking to the very top water slide, where he rested and looked out over the park. From his vantage point on top of the water slide, Solomon was able to see multiple tributes traveling around, while also watching for any tributes ascending the tower. Khen pointed out that although Solomon could see any tribute approaching the tower, he would not be able to fight back. Therefore, Solomon was stuck if any tributes came. Meanwhile, Rosalind had climbed up a large roller coaster track, which used to be called Dragon Breath. As Rosalind carefully traversed the tracks, the 5 cannons sounded, which made her jump and nearly lose her footing. However, she managed to hold on at the last second, and therefore avoid a long fall to the ground. Once Rosalind had climbed to the top of the track, she approached a covered area, which Lauren explained to be the station where passengers would board the coaster. Rosalind looked around before examining the resting train and carefully climbing onto the platform. From there, Rosalind looked out over the arena, where she was able to see the cornucopia, as well as the other rides. As Rosalind breathed in the magnificent view, a scream was heard from the eastern sector, followed by a cannon. During this time, Solomon had climbed on top of the water slide, where he rested. From there, he was able to see both tributes from 11 climbing onto a ship-themed ride. Solomon carefully watched and saw the girl lose her footing and fall off the ship, which caused her cannon to sound. Solomon gasped while looking around. As Solomon scanned the horizon, he seemed shocked to notice the careers approaching the ship as well. He quickly hid himself within the top of the water slide, while the careers neared the ship. Rosalind had looked over the top of the coaster station, where she saw the careers approaching the ship clearly. Although she was on the opposite side of the arena, she was able to see Jelon and Olympia leading the way. The boy from 11 had managed to escape the ship and was now running along the path. However, the careers had noticed and therefore ran after him. The boy screamed. However, Olympia shot an arrow through his head, which sounded his cannon as he hit the ground. Dawn slowly turned into dusk, as the tributes within the arena explored the various structures. Most tributes in the arena did not pay much attention to the variety of different rides, but instead found interesting ways to hide. Lauren commented that Regina of 6 had found the best hiding spot, as she had buried herself within the dirt of a cave-themed drive. That night, the portraits of the girl from 3, the boy from 4, the boy from 6, and the boy from 8, the girl from 9, and both tributes from 11 were shown, which meant that there were 17 tributes remaining. Solomon slowly lay back and began to fall asleep upon seeing the portraits, while Rosalind sighed and lay down on a mat and fell asleep almost instantly. The following morning, Solomon was one of the first to wake up. After drinking some water, he slowly looked around and gasped upon seeing the careers at the bottom of his tower. Fortunately for him, the careers did not see him. However, he gathered his supplies and prepared the slide down the water side. After some discussion, the careers agreed to go up the slide. As the careers began to climb up, Solomon waited carefully, while sitting on top of the water slide. Once he saw Jalon's head, Solomon immediately slid down the slide. Unfortunately, Jalon had noticed Solomon, and the careers quickly followed him down. At the bottom of the slide, Solomon narrowly managed to avoid splashing into the water, and panicked upon hearing the careers. However, he began to run towards a roller coaster, which was less than 100 meters away. Solomon sprinted towards a nearby coaster station. However, he gasped upon the careers shouting delightfully. Solomon proceeded to run into the station, where he panicked. As the careers came closer, he smiled and suddenly ran towards the tracks. Unlike the other coaster tracks, these tracks were supported by a platform, which meant that tributes could climb the tracks without falling through the bottom. Solomon sprinted up the tracks, while the careers chased him. After a while, however, Olympia shouted to Solomon that she would fire her arrow, and to stop running as they would catch up eventually. Solomon laughed, and as Olympia loaded her arrow, he jumped over the side of the coaster track. Viewers in Snow Square gasped with the careers as Lauren asked what Solomon was doing. However, Solomon had not fallen, but instead held onto another coaster track that was directly beneath the one he had jumped off of. Solomon then swung from the coaster track onto a nearby track, while viewers in Snow Square held their breath with anticipation. Meanwhile, Olympia had angrily asked where Solomon had gone. However, Camillus noticed Solomon swinging, and therefore he threw a spear, which rebounded off the track and onto the ground. Below, Jalon then swore at Camillus, and told him he had just wasted a spear. Jalon then yelled at Solomon to jump down. However, Solomon simply jumped onto a lower track that also had a platform supporting it. Jemmy then swore at Solomon, before loading an arrow and firing it. Solomon narrowly avoided the arrow, which sank into the platform. He then jumped off the platform and onto the ground, where he picked up the spear and ran away, amidst angry comments from the careers. Rosalind had seen this commotion happening. However, she did not say anything or attempt to help Solomon. Instead, she ate some of her food. After Solomon had escaped, Rosalind suddenly screamed upon seeing multiple rats staring out of a hole in the structure. She then proceeded to climb down the tracks, whilst trying to avoid the careers. As Rosalind climbed, she noticed Quill of 8 in the distance also climbing the tracks. Unfortunately for Quill, the careers had spotted her, and therefore they ran over onto the track platform above Quill's tracks, and laughed as they readied their weapons. Rosalind panicked upon seeing the careers. However, she quickly dropped her food to the ground, before carefully descending down more sets of tracks. When Quill's cannon sounded, Rosalind seemed to panic even more. However, after she had swung and climbed various rails to get to the ground, she picked up her supplies and ran away in relief. As Rosalind ran, she saw Quill's body, after she had been shot in the head by Olympia. Rosalind seemed disgusted. However, she continued to run until she arrived at a large ocean-themed exhibit. After Solomon had heard Quill's cannon, he breathed out in relief, having escaped the careers. However, this was short-lived, as he was immediately hit in the back of the head with a hard ball. Solomon turned around and shouted upon seeing a large machine, which was spitting out hard candy balls at his head. Solomon proceeded to run, however the machine had wheels, which followed him and continued to aim at his head. Eventually, it became clear that Solomon would need to find cover to escape the machine. Therefore, he ran towards an old concession stand. Solomon immediately ducked behind the concession stand, while waiting hopefully for the robot machine to go away. After a while, the machine finally turned away after Solomon had hidden himself. During this time, it was revealed that a lucky viewer in Snow Square was given the allowance to control this machine. After Solomon had hidden himself beyond the machine's reach, the viewer was given some money and congratulated on playing. This immediately started much excitement throughout Snow Square, as many people became excited to see what other surprises would unfold throughout the games. Back in the arena, toxic gas had been released. Rosalind, who was hiding and looking at the faded murals, screamed upon seeing the gas, and immediately ran inwards. As Rosalind ran, she noticed Regina of 6, who was also running. As Regina ran towards the cornucopia, she was suddenly tackled by Jelon, who promptly stabbed her through the neck. Viewers had seen that the couriers had hidden themselves in various areas near Regina's hiding spot, and had snuck up on her when she had run. The couriers then saw Rosalind, and laughed happily before running towards her. Rosalind screamed. However, as she was running, a spear suddenly flew through the air and impaled Jemmy in the head. Alfonso of 10 revealed himself and charged toward the couriers, with Timber of 7 following him. Both boys held their spears ready, as the other couriers laughed and ran towards them. During this time, Rosalind quickly ran away towards the carnival tent, where she watched the battle occurring. Timber immediately ran towards Jelon with his spear, and Jelon roared and charged with his knife at the ready. The boys engaged in a vicious fight. However, Camelius ran over and stabbed Timber in the neck midway through. As Jelon got up, he yelled at Camelius, saying that it was his kill. However, Camelius said that he would have been stabbed if he himself hadn't helped him. Alfonso, on the other hand, had tackled Olympia, and the two engaged in a bloody fight. Eventually, Olympia stabbed Alfonso in the chest several times. However, Alfonso had stabbed Olympia in the stomach. Olympia screamed. However, Jelon quickly took her hand, and together, the 3 remaining couriers ran away from the toxic gas. Solomon, who had hidden himself within the concession stand, was relatively unaffected by the gas. However, upon noticing tributes running, he stood up and saw the gas in the distance. This seemed to make him panic, and therefore, he stood up and ran inwards. Solomon proceeded to hide inside a cabin of a Ferris wheel. As night fell on the arena that day, the toxic gas lingered. However, most tributes were unaffected and were safe. At midnight, the portraits of Jemmy of 1, Regina of 6, Timber of 7, Quill of 8, and Alfonso of 10 were shown, which left 12 tributes remaining. The next morning, when Rosalind awoke, she seemed relieved to see that some of the toxic gas had left the arena. Rosalind then finished the rest of the food, while drinking a small amount of water. Rosalind then grabbed her knife. However, she flinched as a large bird flew towards her. This robotic bird was designed to attack tributes, and was also controlled by a lucky viewer in Snow Square. As Rosalind screamed, the bird desperately tried to peck at her water bottle. However, Rosalind turned around and smacked the bird out of the air. This subsequently broke the bird, amidst some sighing in Snow Square. Rosalind then ran towards the carnival tent. However, she noticed the force field glowing at the last second, and therefore stopped, and wondered aloud why there would be a force field here. After guessing for a while, she heard a scream, followed by a cannon, and therefore chose to run towards the roller coasters. During this time, Solomon had picked up his spear upon waking up and hearing a noise. Solomon carefully looked around before being attacked by Linda of 7. Linda had jumped towards Solomon, who screamed and thrust his spear into Linda's chest. This surprised many viewers, as Solomon breathed out in shock and relief at what he had just done. He finished his food and gathered his water, just as a robotic bird flew towards him. Solomon muttered, "Not another one," as the bird began to attempt to peck him. Luckily, Solomon managed to swat the bird down with a spear, which caused it to fizz and explode on the ground. Solomon then ran towards the cornucopia, with his spear held tightly in his hand. A few minutes later, Rosalind had managed to climb on top of a roller coaster track, where she sat and looked into the distance for tributes. She seemed relieved when she did not see any. However, after a few minutes, a light rain began to fall. At first, this rain did not seem to be very significant. However, after a while, the rain began to burn through Rosalind's skin. She screamed and quickly crawled to a nearby coaster station, where she hid under the canopy there. For a while, there was not many sounds, except for the screaming of tributes that were unable to find shelter. When the acid rain began, Solomon had quickly run over to a concession stand, where he hid from the rain. As the rain grew bigger, he noticed Bilia of 10 screaming and begging for help as the rain dissolved his grin. Once Bilia's cannon sounded, Solomon quietly muttered that he was sorry, but stayed under the covering of the concession stand until the rain alleviated. During this time, a cannon belonging to Bun of 9 was also heard in the distance, which was due to him waking up on the coaster tracks and not being able to get off in time. Therefore, Bun was dissolved alive in the acid rain, while moaning helplessly on the coaster tracks. After the acid rain had stopped, Rosalind was one of the first tributes to poke her head out of her shelter. From the coaster station, Rosalind gasped upon seeing Swimma of 4 running across a path and towards the carnival. Although Swimma was very wet, she continued to run until she had reached the carnival tent. Viewers had seen that Swimma had hidden herself within the water exhibits. However, she left the pool when the acid rain started. At the carnival tent, Swimma wormed herself beside the force field's heat, which seemed to displease many viewers. Once Swimma was out of sight, Rosalind ran out from under the station and sprinted towards the ship where the tributes from 11 had died on the first day. Rosalind ran up the ship and sat down, while quietly muttering to herself. From on top of the ship, she noticed Charge and Loader, both of 5, walking towards the same station Rosalind had just escaped from, which caused her to breathe out in relief. Lauren and Ken both admitted that she was very lucky to have escaped. Solomon had remained within the concession stand after the rain. However, after seeing Swimma running by and Charge and Loader walking towards the station, he quickly ran out and quickly headed to a tall ride that was once called the Sky Drop. Viewers curiously watched as Solomon began to climb the Sky Drop. Ken stated at this time that Solomon would die if he fell off, and the ride was still sticky from the acid rain. However, Solomon continued to climb until he was near the top. From there, Solomon was able to see the entirety of the park, as well as some land beyond. Solomon looked around until he noticed the couriers, who were resting under a tree near the roller coasters. Solomon then breathed out in relief, before climbing down and running away the opposite direction of the couriers. As night fell, multiple robots that were controlled by capital citizens were released into the arena. The robots attacked multiple tributes, however did not cause much damage. In fact, App 3 actually picked up one of the pieces of candy the robot shot out and ate it. After the robots had finished attacking the tributes, the citizens controlling the robots directed them to a stand, where they were given a chance to win a prize if they hit a target in the stand. That night, the portraits of Linda of 7, Bun of 9, and Bilia of 10 were shown, which left Camelias of 1, Jalon and Olympia both of 2, App of 3, Swimma of 4, Charge and Loader both of 5, and Solomon and Rosalind both of 12 remaining. In the morning, a cannon belonging to Loader of 5 sounded. Viewers had seen Loader attempting to rewire a control panel within the coaster station. However, the panel exploded due to her lack of expertise, and therefore killed her. Her district partner Charge had stood back and therefore survived the explosion. At this point, Game Maker Blanco congratulated all the tributes on making it to the final 8. He then announced that in 20 minutes, a toxic gas would be released into the arena, and the only way to survive this would be to consume a pill located in the cornucopia. He also added that any tribute that touched 2 or more pills at the same time would have their tracker detonated. He then ended his announcement by wishing that the odds be in the tributes' favor. All tributes immediately gathered their supplies and ran inwards. Solomon quickly drank some of his water, before hiding his water within the bushes he had hid in the previous night, before grabbing a spear and running towards the cornucopia. At the cornucopia, Solomon hid himself behind a statue of an old man, and waited carefully for a platform containing the pills to rise up. Rosalind had run inwards after grabbing her knife and water bottle. However, she quickly ran back to the ship and put her water bottle down. Rosalind then ran to the cornucopia, where she hid within some bushes. Once a platform containing the pills had risen, it became eerily clear that this platform only had 7 pills. Lauren excitedly stated that this would mean that one tribute would not get a pill. Immediately, Jalan, Olympia, and Camillus had sprinted into the clearing, before each swallowing a pill. The trio then waited for other tributes to run inwards. After a few minutes of no action, a 3-minute timer appeared in the sky, which seemed to indicate the time until the gas was released. Immediately, Charge ran forwards with a knife in his hand. However, Olympia laughed and effortlessly shot Charge in the knee with an arrow. As Charge screamed in pain, Olivia ran over and taunted him. While Olympia was distracted, Swimmer had run towards the platform and attempted to fight Jalan with her bare hands. However, Jalan laughed and punched her in the face, which caused her to fall and scream while bleeding. Camillus then ran towards Solomon, who had run in with a spear. As Camillus engaged in a spear fight with Solomon, Rosalind and App both ran forwards. Rosalind quickly swallowed a pill, before running towards Camillus. However, as Rosalind ran, an arrow flew through the air and landed on the ground in front of her, which caused her to trip and fall. Olympia swore, and after Charge's cannon sounded, she ran forwards and attempted to tackle Rosalind. However, Solomon quickly thrust his spear through Camillus' neck and ran towards Olympia. A cannon then sounded, which made Solomon look up. Unfortunately for him, Olympia shot him in the stomach as he looked up. However, Olympia looked up and panicked upon realizing that she no longer had any arrows. Rosalind then wasted no time in stabbing Olympia through the head, which sounded her cannon. As this fight was happening, Jalan had gained the upper hand in his fight against Swimmo, and had managed to stab her in the head. Jalan then looked up in rage upon seeing Solomon swallowing a pill and fleeing. However, he also noticed App running away. Jalan then angrily swore, before pulling out a sword and slashing the dead body of Swimmo multiple times. After a while of running, Solomon thanked Rosalind for helping him during the pill chase, to which Rosalind replied that she was glad to see him. However, as Solomon spoke, he sadly told Rosalind that there were only 4 tributes remaining. Rosalind nodded, and a tear fell down her cheek, while she asked to check and look at Solomon's wound. Solomon accepted, and after a bit, Rosalind had stopped the bleeding and had wrapped up the wound with a leaf from a nearby tree. The pair then spent the rest of the day talking, while looking out for Jalan. The day continued with a few events happening. However, viewers in Snow Square were entertained by watching App rewiring a few circuits and Jalan sharpening his sword. When night fell, a light breeze had begun to blow over the arena. After a small breeze, however, it soon became very windy when the portraits of Camillus of 1, Olympia of 2, Swimmer of 4, and Charge and Loader of 5 were shown. This left Jalan of 2, App of 3, and Solomon and Rosalind, both of 12, remaining. The next morning, all tributes awoke naturally, which meant that all remaining tributes had a good night asleep. Once the game makers were sure all tributes were awake, multiple clown mutts were released. These clown mutts had the strength and speed of a regular human. However, they had large fang teeth. The clown mutts were controlled by capital citizens in Snow Square, and were supposed to chase tributes to the carnival tent. This plan worked successfully, and the now open carnival tent revealed a variety of glass panes that were placed on the floor. Jalan was the first to enter the tent. He sprinted to the center of the tent, where he watched the entrance with his sword at the ready. As Rosalind and Solomon ran, both Ken and Lauren stated that they were betting on Jalan. After App had entered the tent, she screamed upon seeing Jalan. However, Rosalind and Solomon followed, and a fight soon occurred. Solomon immediately ran towards App, who was weaponless. As App begged for mercy, Solomon whirled around upon hearing a cannon sound. Solomon screamed and stabbed App in the neck with his spear upon seeing Jalan laughing over Rosalind's body. Solomon proceeded to stand up amidst Jalan's taunting. Jalan mockingly told Solomon that he could not beat himself in a fight, before laughing and holding his sword out. Solomon replied that he would try, and that a Sharif from his district had done the same a few years back and nearly won. Jalan laughed again and told Solomon that he himself was not as weak as the other tributes of the past. However, Jalan laughed and told Solomon to bring him. Solomon charged first. However, Jalan dodged his spear and slashed his arm. Solomon screamed as blood poured. However, he turned around and threw a spear, which surprised many viewers in Snow Square as well as Jalan. The spear impaled Jalan's right lung, which caused him to fall and gasp to the ground in pain. Solomon then grinned triumphantly, before running forwards, removing his spear and stabbing Jalan again. It was then announced that Solomon Grew was the victor of the 104th Hunger Games, and he was subsequently airlifted out of the arena. As Solomon was airlifted to safety via a hole in the roof of the tent, the glass panes under the bodies shattered, which caused the bodies of the fallen tributes to fall into the darkness below. Solomon was flown to Gaul Hospital, where he received medical treatment for the injuries he had received in the arena. After a few days, he was taken to the accommodation center, where he spent long hours talking with Rue and watching replays of the games. For his victor's interview, Solomon was dressed in a dark black suit. As he sat down and began his interview with Lauren, he accepted Lauren's apology for underestimating him in the games. Throughout his interview, he kept calm and answered the questions politely. When Lauren asked what Solomon had thought about Rosalind, however, Solomon thought deeply, before saying that he had regarded her as a friend at most. Solomon's interview ended with polite applause, albeit without cheering. GameMaker Blanco was also interviewed. However, he did not say much, except that he was very excited to be GameMaker for the quinquennial Quell next year. After his victor's interview, Solomon spent a lot of time talking with various victors. A few days later, the accommodation center was plunged into a blackout, which had allegedly been started by Giff Schneider, victor of the 91st Hunger Games. During the blackout, the cameras were also turned off. It is known that when peacekeepers tried to interfere, Easter Rolex, victor of the 83rd Hunger Games, and Casco Astriana, victor of the 98th Hunger Games, had prepared night vision goggles and therefore were able to attack and kidnap the peacekeepers. During this time, the peacekeepers were deployed outside the accommodation center as they waited for the rebels to exit. However, after an hour, a hovercraft was seen to leave the roof of the accommodation center. This allegedly belonged to the rebels. However, there was no evidence. After this rebellious incident, large spray paint, which read "Stop the Games" and "Justice," was discovered within the center. However, when peacekeepers searched for evidence of the thieves, they could not find any. The thieves had allegedly worn clothes designed by Ava Barrick, victor of the 81st Hunger Games, which were designed to not leave any traces behind. The victors, which were allegedly involved in this attack, were questioned. However, because of the lack of proof and evidence, they were not punished. A week after this incident, Solomon returned to District 12, where he took up sport hunting with Rue's brother Crimson. Solomon went on to live a quiet life, and years later, he married and had children.